Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour, and today is Monday, March 31st, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it'll take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation. The primary tool in this work, that tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet, and it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again absolutely free. You can also download a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one where people have been stepped through that worksheet process. And if you choose to listen to them even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also go to your App Store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you choose to do that, before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon and Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. And we hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we would appreciate you doing so. You can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, or you can email Jeanie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a question or a comment from you, we'll address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred, so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. And if you're listening to us at live.needle.com/mindshiftersradio, we're glad you're here. We're glad you're sharing time with us. And from that position, you can't type in the chat room or into the app or press the phone icon and talk to us directly. So we would encourage you, if you have any interest in doing that, to download the Needle app from your app store. It's Nedl. It's an AI assisted live radio tuner. And once you download that app and open it and sign in, answer a few questions, it will then give you the opportunity to either type a comment into the app or tap the phone icon and talk to us directly voice to voice. And as I like to say, we're thrilled anytime anybody chooses to do that, because it makes it infinitely easier for us to live into our intention with this work. The intention we have with this work is to be of service And that is just so much easier to do when we know how these things are landing for you. What's of most use? Some of the reading we're doing with commentary, some of the people who've done worksheets, some of the discussion. What is it that's assisting you or that you feel is most beneficial for you in our work on this show? For whatever reason, I had gotten several comments from people that the shows last week on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday were all quite useful. So thank you for that feedback or input if you were one of those who gave us that feedback. And as I listened back to them over this weekend, I would have to say, yeah, we covered a lot of territory. We were ending up, with a fairly good review of core issues and techniques. And um, as always, I'm very grateful whenever anybody finds that useful, because that's why we're here. It's why we're doing what we're doing. We're doing the best we can to make sure that as we spend this time together, it's beneficial to all of us. And one of the more beneficial things for everyone is when we actively question whatever it is that's being presented or whatever it is that we've come to believe over the years. I just had a session with someone who, despite being intelligent and competent and very accomplished as a person, she's carrying around a belief that she downloaded when she was a child that came from her mother. Whenever her mother would get triggered to upset or her mother's emotions would get out of control for the mother, her mother would say something to the effect of, "What is wrong with you?" And my patient has now had a number of different life circumstances arise where she finds herself operating from the conclusion that something's horribly wrong with her. And so all of the work we do is geared around either helping us identify what those negative thoughts or beliefs are, or dismantling those negative thoughts and beliefs. Because if they're negative, we know by definition they're false. So how do we do that? Well, we do that with EFT tapping sessions. We do that with repeated reality management worksheets, where we figure out in the current version, in the first 3 steps, what our mind is doing to create the upset we're experiencing. And then in the 4th step, we cancel all of that and literally ask to be shown another way to look at or interpret or integrate the life experiences we've had, but change what we make it mean about us. Every time we have a life experience and we choose a negative meaning, we're in error. And we create a circumstance that we then have to resolve somewhere down the road, or it just keeps influencing our life experience. So please remember that we welcome comments and or callers through the app, even if I seem to be in the middle of reading something or in the middle of a monologue. But in lieu of anybody typing in a comment, asking a question, sending an email, or raising a hand in the phone queue, I'll return to our reading with commentary of the book by Christian Sundberg titled A Walk in the Physical. Where we left off as part of the reading, Christian says, in order to have the experience of creaturehood here on earth, we must accept the veil. The veil is a set of constraints in consciousness space that temporarily yet rigorously obscures our true nature so that we can have the full experience of being human. The veil causes us to forget what we are, at least temporarily, and it generally limits our perception to the physical so that we can have the experience of being this human character. Now, this is necessary primarily for two reasons. The first is because a significant part of the value of the human experience is how the spirit chooses to operate and evolve through the very unique experience of this dream of separation that the earthly experience permits. And thereby the veil permits that temporary experience of this dream of separation. The second is because if we fully remembered where we came from, it would be almost impossible to focus on and function in this dense and comparatively, quote, low vibration, close quotes, physical universe. In fact, the longing to go home would be unbearable. Source, all that is, God, light, love, whatever you want to call it, Source, so unconditionally loves us that it allows us to choose to forget that love for a time so that we can better truly know that love forever. In that little book, The Little Soul in the Sun, it's kind of like the story of these two young fish were swimming around and they passed an older fish, and the older fish says to them, "Afternoon, fellas, how's the water?" And they kind of grunted and swam past, and a little bit later on, one of the younger fish said to the other one, "Did you hear what that guy said?" And the other one said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, what's this water thing he's talking about?" When you're living in it, when you're breathing it, when you're swimming in it, you can lose awareness of it. And in the story Little Soul in the Sun, the little soul wonders what it is to be light, to have this brightness, to have this shining countenance, because it's out there in the light, and everything around it is light, and it's light. And it says, I'd like to have an experience of what it's like to be light when there's darkness around. And I can't really have that experience out here, in the bright sunshine, floating around as a soul in the ethers, you might say. And that's why the story goes on about how the contrast was created to plunge the little soul into darkness. And one of the messages in that story is that when you find yourself surrounded by darkness, everywhere you look it seems there's darkness, you are the light. And you can get a deeper, richer sense of yourself as light when you're surrounded by darkness than you can when you're surrounded by other beings of brilliance and light who are all operating from their awareness of their true nature as light, as source. So that last short paragraph I read says, God, light, love, source, whatever you want to call it, loves us so unconditionally, so fully, so totally, and so completely that it allows us to choose to forget that love for a short period of time, relatively speaking, so that we can better truly know that love forever. He goes on and says, the entire soul does not incarnate. Part of the soul, always remains at home, capital H, home. The local personality portion of the self contains only a small portion of the entire self. Earth is but a very, very tiny portion of all that is. And here he capitalizes all that is. Our universe is one of the most constraining types currently existing, but it serves an incredibly worthwhile purpose. Being unaware of that larger context can be a meaningful, quote, part of the game, close quotes, as the value of this experience often dwells in the, quote, punch, close quotes, of physical life. And yet underneath it all, unharmable, true love, capital Love, true love always exists and always presides. You are always totally okay. You are always completely taken care of. Which means, of course, as a sidebar, he can't be referring to your physical body. He can't be referring to you getting all of the money that you want or your fantasies. He's talking about your true nature as this essence of consciousness, this being, this soul consciousness can never be hurt, can never be chipped, dented, rusted, faded, or broken in any way, is always okay, and is always completely taken care of, even when a small part of that consciousness has the experience of incarnating into a physical body and having all of the aches and pains and challenges and social dynamic complexes and political issues swirling around and physical violence and lack of, finances. Even when all of that is happening, your essence is always okay, totally okay, and always completely loved and taken care of. The next section is titled with the question, what is the physical universe? And Christian writes, the physical universe is an experience occurring within consciousness. You are not, quote, in, close quotes, your body. Your body is an experience happening within your consciousness, within you as a conscious being. The physical universe is your experience of sensory data, such as sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. Perceptions, feelings, and thoughts are included. The physical universe exists in the contents of your local mind and in the minds of all the other participants. When we ask what reality is, we tend to ask, quote, what thing or things is reality, close quotes. Because we assume that things, such as discrete matter and objects and ideas, these are what is most real. That's what we assume. In fact, that which is most real transcends all these physical things and indeed gives rise to them. The truth is, who and what you are, what is truly real, transcends all physical things and actually gives rise to all physical things. So, when you understand that this experience you're having is not limited to these physical experiences and your thoughts about it. It expands your capacity for experience in different ways. So again, I like to remind us from time to time that what we're doing here is talking about things. We're using words to try and point towards things that go way beyond the words we're using and way beyond what our intellect can comprehend. And it does that each new heartbeat. It's not like there's one little sidebar over here that my mind can't wrap itself around. It's everything we're talking about needs to be embraced and breathed into and softened into so we can start to have an experience that isn't limited by what we think about these things. When we ask about what reality really is, we tend to ask about what things are real. In fact, that which is most real transcends all of the physical things, all of the mental, emotional things. And in fact, it is what gives rise to all of those things. That is not just a philosophical idea, but rather a tangible, fundamental state of being that can actually be experienced and fully known. However, it is experienced with something other than just the intellect and the conscious logical mind. Christian goes on and says, the content of the physical universe experience takes place in a consistent way per the, quote, rule set, close quotes, of the physical reality. Our science is the investigation of that physical reality rule set. Physical reality is not an objective material place, but it is instead a real experience of a virtual environment taking place within the pre-existing consciousness of every participant. I'm going to read that again so you can just kind of slow down and think about this. As I read this next thing, think about how Michael Ryce, even just recently in one of his shows, was talking about how each of us perceives our experience differently. Each of us is creating our own reality, even if there are 7 or 8 of us in a field that we call space and time, and we all seem to be experiencing the same thing. Of the actuality of that moment, each of us experiences something radically different because we're creating our own reality. This is why you can have 7 or 8 people witness an intersection where there's an accident, and you can end up with 7 or 8 different stories about what actually happened. And one of the ways to understand that is what Christian just wrote here. Physical reality is not an objective material place. Physical reality is instead a real experience of a virtual environment taking place within the pre-existing consciousness of every participant. Everybody that sees an accident has a different experience of it because of their pre-existing consciousness. He goes on and writes, consciousness has been folded and firmed, in quotes, folded and firmed, into the experience of the world and the body. The limitations of the body are an important part of that experience. And yet the body is not fundamental, just as the physical universe is not fundamental. The framework of our local reality is the title of the next section here. And he writes, we all come from a series of dimensions that, quote, precede, close quotes, our physical dimension. Those preceding realities are generally thought responsive. Our physical reality manifests dependably in accordance with its rule set as a result of individual and collective intention and thought form. Thought form has a physical reality to it in the other, quote, higher, close quotes, systems. Thought form has a physical reality to it in other thought systems, in other higher systems. Thought form is created and influenced by intent, thought, expectation, and belief. So he's coming back to this concept that we believe that my physical body is primary, is fundamental, that the desk in front of me is fundamental, etc. And yet, what he's coming back to yet again in this work is to say consciousness is what is fundamental. Not my physical body, not the building I'm in, not the desk I'm sitting in front of or the chair I'm sitting on, but my consciousness is fundamental. Change in consciousness space precedes change in the physical world. This is where I think the last time we read this book, I mentioned the book As a Man Thinketh, because back in the late early 1900s, people were writing about this. There was a renaissance of awareness of the power of our thoughts to bring about a shift in our physical experience, in our life experience. Consciousness is fundamental. Therefore, change in consciousness space must precede a change in the physical world. Change in consciousness space, including change in the intent and the mind of individuals, is valuable and important. The individual's efforts to improve the quality of their intent towards love and to conquer fear, these are the active playing field for real change. And here he says, to find out more about that, see Tom Campbell's work. And this is just like what the author of As a Man Thinketh would talk about. If you think in a certain pattern and commit to it and believe it, things are going to start changing in your life. And the beliefs that you hold on to, even at a subconscious level, are constantly affecting your thought process and therefore affecting your experience of life. Back to what Christian says here. He says, the name of the game is love, even in ways that may appear physically insignificant. Physical results naturally happen subsequent to a change in your intention. Well, Christian has already said that what he has been led to believe, what he came to know from his memory of his pre-physical life experience, is that the whole purpose for being here in the physical plane is for this little part of your soul energy, your consciousness energy, to get focused on your physical body and the soap opera-like dynamics of dealing with other humans. The whole purpose of that is for your consciousness to get better and better at being able to choose for love in the middle of more and more difficult physical constraint sets. And those physical constraint sets can involve aches and pains, They can involve financial troubles. They can involve loss of loved ones. They can involve broken relationships. They can involve tremendous successes and, winning Olympic medals and championships on your team at the grade school or high school or college level or pro level. They involve all of these things. And Christian says what he's been told, how he's been informed in his life is that all of us are here for the express purpose of getting better and better, strengthening our ability to choose for love in more and more difficult situations. In the book, Christian goes on and writes, distance and linear time are not fundamental. Linear time is a local experience. It's a sequence taking place within a, quote, higher, close quotes, system. All of those experiences of time and place within the depths of this moment, now, capital N-O-W, they're all happening within this ever-present moment. We are always connected to all other reality systems. We never truly leave what you might call the higher realms in order to come to Earth. Metaphorically, we sleep in heaven to have the dream of Earth. Just think about that. What if you sleep in heaven to have the dream of Earth? I remember the movie Avatar, and they had that dynamic where they had grown from cloning, they had grown these physical bodies of the alien species, and then they would have humans go into a chamber where they could basically transfer their consciousness into the cloned physical body of the alien, and then they could walk around in actuality as a physical being while they slept in a chamber. Christian is saying essentially that's what's happening here. That a part of us, a small part of us, has come down to have the conscious experience of the physical realm, while the vast majority of each of us as a consciousness entity is in heaven, active, connected, experiencing. He writes, we're always connected to all other reality systems. We never truly leave the higher realms to come and be here on earth. Metaphorically speaking, we sleep in heaven to have the dream of earth. Generally speaking, the experience of the higher realms is far more real, lucid, and magnificent than any earthly experience. Different, right? And earth is different, not better, not worse, but far more limited than those experiences that consciousness has when it's not limited to the physical realm. So, taking just a moment to check for callers and comments. Thank you, all of those who are listening. Please remember, if you want to make a question or a comment, you need to download the Needle app and open it and sign in and answer a few questions. And we welcome your feedback or input. The next section, Christian writes, is the prism of the human mind. And Christian writes, the physical universe is like a giant mirror provided to give us the opportunity to actually experience our beliefs, experience our perceptions and our assumptions. The contents of the human mind color the entire physical experience. Michael Ryce likes to talk about the story of Job from the Bible and the insight that Job has early on, but he doesn't really click into it. He makes the statement, but it doesn't really land. And he says, what I have feared most has come to pass. And so at one level, if you think of yourself as a victim, a passive victim of the flow of life, then you say, what I fear most has come to pass. Then you just say, God, light, life is punishing me. At another level, if you recognize the dynamic power of consciousness as a creative force, mind energy as a creative force, then you say, when I focus on all these things I fear, I facilitate them happening in my experience. I'm literally drawing it to me. I'm literally telling the energy of the universe that I want this experience. And so I'm busy creating my tomorrows today by the thoughts I'm choosing and pouring my mind energy into. This is right out of lesson 8 in the Way of Mastery. Throwing these pebbles or thoughts into the pool of your consciousness. The physical universe is like a giant mirror provided to give us the opportunity to actually experience our beliefs, our perceptions, and our assumptions. The contents of the human mind color the entire physical experience. Starting when we were children, the human perspective is formed from living within the experience of duality. In parentheses, he says, the individual has little or no memory of his or her larger nature because of this veil of forgetting. And thus, the person may believe form is everything, close parentheses. All ideas, objects, and sense data, anything in the realm of form, are not fundamental. And yet, while one is human, they are experienced as the fundamental truth, as fundamentally real. The human mind then understands its entire world from the viewpoint of those forms that it brought into existence over the course of its local experience. I don't know, I just flashed on the line from Guy Finley where he says, the human mind is just going to churn and do what it automatically does. He calls it the mechanical level of mind. It's going to churn and keep doing exactly what it's always done until the moment where it wakes up and realizes that the activity of the human mind is the source of its pain, not the solution to its pain. And once that's recognized, it stops creating what it doesn't want. Christian goes on and writes, but all interpretation is chosen. Consciousness places the meaning upon the form. The forms of our physical universe are neutral, and they do not possess inherent charge. This is exactly what's written about in the Way of Mastery. There's an entire lesson titled, All Events Are Neutral. And somebody typed a comment that asks, what book is this? I'm reading from the book A Walk in the Physical by Christian Sundberg. And currently I'm reading from page 27 on the Kindle version. Christian Sundberg. And thank you for that comment. It allowed me to see that someone has a call hand up. Is this Don?
Yes, it is. Can you hear me okay?
I'm doing well. I'm barely able to hear you. Are you hearing me well?
Yeah, I hear you perfectly. Is that better?
I hear very strong rustling sounds like you have your hand over your microphone, but your voice is still quite faint.
I'll go off the Bluetooth and go into the speakerphone. Then hold on.
So let me get somebody else who's already listening to comment. Are you able to hear Don? Julia says not hearing the caller.
Actually, I don't know how to use the speaker. I can't use the speakerphone.
All right, I'm not able to hear you. Are you on speakerphone?
Now I can't use speakerphone because this is really a call-in, right? It's not a dial-in phone thing. It's through needle. So I have to use a Bluetooth thing, which I'm plugged directly into my phone.
Okay. Now, as you're doing that, the last sentence or two was noticeably louder, but there is this rustling as though something is grabbing your microphone and rubbing against it.
I'm using a wired headphone into my phone, and so I'm trying to adjust it so that.
All right, your voice is much better now.
Okay, I'll go ahead and try. One, I hate to interrupt you on this Christian Sundberg because I really love that stuff that's in there, and I'm going to have to get that book one of these days. And I wanted to call for a while about the concept of judgment. However, I don't think I'm going to get to that today. What I really wanted to talk about is I'm really having a lot of problem with this genocide that is going on in our time, which, despite the daily attacks on what we perceive as our democracy in this country, this seems to be a much bigger deal. The previous administration was bad enough, but this one talks about aid to Israel, who clearly just wants to wipe out the entire population. That was true to a lot of us from the very beginning. I believe I heard a quote this past week that there would be aid to Israel for an eternity. And then, of course, there's people that talk about the Gaza being Riviera, in the Mideast. And just one of many quotes that seem to be apropos, Martin Luther King says, "For evil to succeed, all it needs is for good men to do nothing." And I feel like I have to do something about this. I put a Free Palestine sticker on my car. That's hardly anything, but at least it's something. When I lived in Chicago in 2003 in the Iraq War, I was involved in nonviolent civil disobedience there prior to the bombing of Iraq because, again, it was clear to people that were paying attention that they had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11 and that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with, whoever we wound up killing that was supposed to do it. But, and I was arrested 5 times, and 5 times I was found not guilty or the charges were dropped. It was, in essence, a very disappointing sort of experience because it changed nothing, right? It didn't stop the war. And
Okay, let me just slow you down and ask you to take a breath. And this kind of work would have you understand that when you make a statement like that with your behavior, lining it up with your words, it is making an impact. It may not have exactly the impact that you would want it to be. We've had this a number of times with different people who've called here. Susan Bingham is one of them, right, who says things like, well, I'm sitting in this situation with my family and quote, all I can do is, as though what's about to be said by her is next to nothing, send them blessings. And I try to catch that when people say that and say, this is one of the more powerful things you can do. When you go out and participate in nonviolent resistance to those things that you think are false, your action has a ripple effect. You have no way of knowing how many people benefited from seeing you there. You have no way of knowing how the little kindnesses that you do set up that ripple effect that help feed the goodness and the kindness and the compassion in our world. So I would bring you back to what you started. I forget exactly the phrase you used, but something about your level of upset in response to the genocide.
Yeah.
And what we talk about in this work is how critically important it is for me to dismantle my upset before I decide how to take an action to be a blessing to myself and others. Because if I'm acting from the anger or the fear or the despair, it's not going to be as loving, it's not going to be as clear, it's not going to be as effective for what I say I want to affect this positive change, because I'm acting from this intense, tight, constricted, contracting field of energy.
Right. So I agree with that. So what you're saying is just because you dismantle your level of upset about a certain situation doesn't mean that you can't positively act on that. It kind of goes back to when you talked about Mother Teresa about protesting against something as opposed to protesting for something, right?
Yes, and we strongly encourage people, if you have an inclination to get involved politically, locally or regionally, if you have financial resources, if you have the luxury of not having to work, if you have enough energy to do this after work, maybe you're not raising small kids, and so you can get active and start a movement to bring awareness or to get petitions signed and to get voting rights, like strengthened, etc. Please do that. All we're talking about in this work is do the emotional work first, because as we were just reading about from Christian Sundberg's book, your thoughts create your perception of the reality you're experiencing.
Right.
And eventually, at another level, your mind energy that you pour your mind into, the thought patterns that you pour your mind energy into, actually has an impact on the actuality.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, I see that. Well, if I can just make, I guess, sort of a public service announcement around this. So the reason I asked you if you were familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate, who for people who don't know is pretty renowned. He's a Hungarian-Canadian Jew. I'm a stickler for accuracy, so I'm not sure about this, but he survived going to a concentration camp because his mother gave him away to somebody as a very young boy, and I'm not sure if his mother died in the concentration camp or if she escaped it. He was a Zionist youth leader when he was young. He completely has denounced Zionism now and realizes what a travesty it is. People don't understand that, Zionism is not the same as Judaism, and
is not the same as what?
Judaism.
All right.
And also that pro-Palestinian is not anti-Semitism. And so he is I guess I didn't finish this. He is a world-renowned expert on trauma. And since he was in utero during Hitler's time, he's got a lot of that, and he's dealt with a lot of different trauma, not only from the Holocaust and the Nazis, but all kinds of trauma. And there's tons of YouTube videos that he's done. Well, he was also involved in a movie that just came out last year that didn't get, I don't know why, as much acclaim as the Academy Award-winning documentary No Other Land, called Where the Olives Weep, which people can go online.
It's called Where the Olives
Weep.
Weep, okay.
It came out in 2024, just last year, just like the other movie. And just like No Other Land, it doesn't even deal with Gaza. It has to deal with what's been going on in the West Bank from the beginning, since 1948. And with the settlers that are continue to expand illegally with the support of the Israeli government. I think it's, having seen both movies, I think it's a more powerful movie than No Other Land. Though I would beseech people to try to search out No Other Land too. That's really difficult. So No Other Land won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. I don't know if this has ever happened in history. Has no U.S. distributor. It played in Chicago, because I checked, it was playing at some little Wrigleyville theater I'd never heard of for a while. It was playing at an independent theater here in Atlanta for a little while, and I was lucky enough to see it because the week after I went, it was gone. But I think it had a pretty good run. But it has no U.S. distributor, even though there's distributors around the world. You can, in the UK, you can watch it on Amazon.co.uk, but you can't watch it in U.S. on Amazon U.S. Okay.
Okay. So let's just get to the point that you're making. You're doing a public service announcement, letting us know that Gabor Mate, who is a very powerful, very popular psychiatrist and a speaker on trauma, and he's written books like In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts and others, and he's been a big proponent for this, harm reduction approach to dealing with people that have addictions and trauma problems, etc. He was in a movie called When the Olives Weep.
Where the Olives Weep.
Where the Olives Weep.
He was in it, but he was also part of the production team per se. He was involved in the making of it.
Okay.
He's not the only figure in the movie, but he's one of the figures that they talk about. Yeah.
Okay. So there's our public service announcement. We're encouraging people, if you have concerns about what's going on against the Palestinians and this, what some would call a genocide, this is a very good movie to educate yourself about it.
Right. Two other quick public service announcements related. If people would just Google Gabor Mate Australia, there's an hour on YouTube. There's an hour and 20-minute video where he's lecturing, where he goes through the whole history of Palestine and Zionism and Israel, because it's way different than what people in this country think. Like, there is much more opposition to what's going on in terms of the Israeli government, Netanyahu, in Israel than there is here, because we're so propagandized by AIPAC, who's for sure one of the top 5 most powerful political action committees in this country, up there with big oil and big pharma, that people don't really know what's going on. And here's a Hungarian Jew, all right, who was a Zionist youth leader, who actually says who's been over there. Unlike people here, including Jews over here, they have no idea what's going on over there. They get reports, and because they have this false equivalency of Judaism and Zionism, or pro-Palestine. I mean, look what's happened to the higher institutions at Columbia University. 2 presidents gone.
Okay, now take a breath. Let's come back to the public service announcement part of this.
Okay.
If you search Australia,
Gabor
Mate, right? Gabor is his first name.
Right.
Mate is his second name.
Right.
And then you can get access to a nice summary that he's done about the Palestinians and the Israelis and the land over there.
Exactly, and the history from the very beginning, from the Nakba, which is what they call what happened in 1948. So it probably would come up if you did it in reverse, but I did Gabor Mate Australia. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to add, he's speaking to the Jewish Council of Australia. Okay, in this YouTube video.
Okay.
And then the last part of the public service announcement is, which is also really powerful, which I told Michael about a couple weeks ago or so, another YouTube video, I think this is from like 2016, so it's not as recent, called The Occupation of the American Mind, is really powerful, I think. And the No Other Land, which won the Academy Award, it's good. Good luck for people trying to view it online in this country, because it's been blackballed. It's very good, but I think Where the Olives Weep is more powerful, and I think the Occupation of the American Mind is more powerful too.
All right, excellent. And we would just hasten to encourage people, if you're going to watch or listen to talks about this, use the tools to dismantle your upset, to restore your mind to this clarity of perception that's available only when you're coming from compassion or in touch with your true nature as love. and dismantle the hostility and fear so that what you're perceiving has a greater chance of being closer to actuality.
I understand that, but will you admit that that's hard to do when you think about 50,000 people being killed, the majority of women and children, who have nothing whatsoever to do with Hamas and bombings on October 7th, while the U.S., where we live, supports them with military arms and endless amounts of money.
So yes, you asked me a question. The answer is yes. It would be very hard to do if that's what you're focused on. And what I like to tell people about this kind of thing is, and for decades now in my work, I encourage people to be very careful about what they engage in and pour into their mind, because if you choose to focus on what these days passes as news, what you're going to get is the highlights of the worst stuff going on around the globe.
True.
And it's a tiny fraction of what's actually going on around the globe. There's so much more good going on. And if I keep focusing on, with all of this upset about the negativity of what's going on, it's almost impossible for me to stay loving and to get a clear picture of the actuality of life, and to ask and be open to the feedback that I might get intuition-wise, spiritually, etc., when I ask, what's mine to do here? How can I be a blessing to myself or others here? It's almost impossible to tune into that when you're filled with rage or despair or sadness, because you keep focusing on, the tragedy. And it's not that there's not a place for that. There is a place to educate yourself. This is why, I didn't just cut you off and said, okay, let's just focus on what are the tools that you are suggesting that people might use to educate themselves. And as they do that, my encouragement is use the tools. Keep your breath moving. Have worksheets with you. Use the EFT tapping. And keep focusing on asking for your higher guidance about what's yours to do to contribute here. I think about books like Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and other stories about, the true story about Custer, and the true story of Columbus. And so all kinds of good things to get educated about. At the same time, I don't need to sink into rage or depression or despair, because those things are not going to help me take enlightened action. And if I pour my mind energy into those things that lead me to feeling rage and despair, etc., that's what I'm adding to the soup.
Right.
So we're down to our last couple of minutes here. You want to make a last statement?
I just wanted to I have a question too. So even though with the needle, because I used to use some wireless Bluetooth headphones, but they no longer work. So even though I'm not making a phone call into needle, should I be able to use the speakerphone on my car to communicate with you once I press the proper buttons on the needle app?
I can't answer that. From the technical side of things, I'm not sure where it's all come from and where it's going.
I'm just not sure how other people are talking to you when they call in.
Yeah, I'm not either. So
okay.
If I will ask people to comment on that in our next show, and if I get feedback, I'll pass it along to you.
Okay.
But I will thank you all for your listening and for taking the time to be with us today, and I'll remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. Please, if there's any part of this conversation that sparks upset in you, use the tools. That's why we're here. And please remember that Michael and Jeanie should go live in just a moment or two. Blessings.